When I pulled up to the Home Depot the other day to buy some insulation for this basement that I'm finishing, I saw all the usual suspects. Some pink fiberglass, some rock wool, but what really caught me off guard was denim insulation. Yes, denim, as in recycled jeans and jean jackets and maybe even some jorts, thank you Tobias Funke, and whatever other joutfits people may have thrown away at some point. I had no idea what denim insulation even was or why a huge store like Home Depot would be carrying this. But as it turns out, it was the only available option for the situation that I was in this basement. So I insulated every exterior wall of this basement with denim insulation, and I learned a few things along the way. Denim insulation is very different than fiberglass and certainly very different than rock wool insulation. So I want to do some comparisons today to see where this relative newcomer to the insulation world fits in amongst its compatriots. So we're going to take a look at several different things, and one of the first things you'll notice, besides the fact that it's blue, which is very different, is that it's soft. This stuff is not irritating. It's not going to get on your skin and cause you to be all itchy. You can rub this on your arms or your face and it doesn't matter. It actually feels kind of nice. It's just like a squishy pillow. So it's pretty nice stuff. Now, in addition, that means you're likely not going to need as much PPE while you're working with it. Now, in order to compare this to the fiberglass and the rock wool, we're going to start with cost and talk about why this is priced the way it is. Once we've identified costs, we're going to talk through availability, thermal transmission, comfort and safety, how it handles fire, its acoustic properties, moisture control, and installation ease. We'll run through all of these briefly to take a look at whether this makes sense and if this is a viable product in the market today, and why a huge store like Home Depot is carrying this right alongside rock wool and fiberglass. Let's jump right into cost. This stuff costs a little bit more than fiberglass. Fiberglass currently comes in at $7.62 to fill one 8-foot stud bay, 16 inches on center, using 2x4s. This Henry Ultra Touch denim insulation costs about 29% more than that. It comes in at $9.82 to fill that same stud bay. And lastly, Owens Corning R13 Thermofiber, which is their mineral wool offering, comes in at a whopping $15.82 per bay. The mineral wool is essentially twice as much as fiberglass, and the denim insulation fits somewhere in the middle there and much closer to the lower side, to the fiberglass side, which is great. So just something to keep in mind when we're talking about whether this is worth what you pay for it. Now, the next big factor is availability, which is actually what drove me to create this video in the first place. If you walk into a Lowe's, a Home Depot, an Ace Hardware, there's a really good chance, at least in my experience and with those that I've talked to, that you are not going to be able to find unfaced R13 insulation in the fiberglass variety. So I ended up buying the only thing that was available, which was the denim insulation that is unfaced in R13. That said, you can order this, you can have this sent to you, but typically you're looking at a 1.5 to 2.5 week lead time in order for that stuff to be delivered to you or for pickup at the store. I don't know if it's a shortage or if it's an intentional decision by the hardware suppliers to say we're not supplying R13 unfaced in fiberglass, but that is absolutely what I came across. So leave me a comment below if you're experiencing the same thing in your area, or maybe it's just me and where I live. If you take a look at the numbers on screen here, this is how each of these stacks up when it comes to its thermal performance. Now, you'll notice that they're all relatively similar. They're not exactly the same, of course, and that's because each of these is a 3.5 inch thick R13 batt. That is the number that we care about most, is R13. R13 is R13 across the board, basically. So, in other words, you're not going to see much, if any, difference when insulating in your 3.5 inch stud bays, at least, with the denim insulation versus the fiberglass versus the mineral wool. They're all going to be pretty similar. Next up is comfort and safety. And again, this is the area where the denim absolutely shines. And this kind of kills the competition, honestly. If you're a DIYer looking to do an install yourself and you're worried about getting all that itchy stuff all over your skin, this stuff is the way to go. This stuff is soft, it's easy to work with. There is one caveat that I mentioned before, and that is I do recommend still wearing a face mask because yes, it's safe in terms of what it's putting off in the air, but it does, in my opinion, put off more stuff in the air than fiberglass or rock wool. If you breathe some of that in, it's essentially cotton, but there are chemicals that are treated. It's called borate that's used in this, and you definitely don't want to be breathing that stuff in if you can avoid it. And I found that this left a little blue powder all over the floor when I was installing it, and it does kick up some fibers in the air. So I recommend wearing a respirator It's probably not going to kill you if you don't, but we always want to make sure that we're watching out for our safety and our health. Fiberglass is itchy on its own. You really ought to be completely covered in all the right things. I remember the first basement I ever did, I installed the fiberglass insulation and I put on a full Tyvek suit so that nothing would touch my skin. That did not last long. You don't necessarily need a whole Tyvek suit. It's not that bad, but it definitely helps to be protected and covered. If you're working with rock wool insulation, that stuff is a beast. I highly recommend that you stay totally covered and make sure none of that gets on you. And then as soon as you're done with whatever you were wearing that day, throw that right in the wash and try to get that stuff out as best you can, because it is nasty. I do not like it. One of the reasons this denim works so well for insulation and for acoustical properties that we'll talk about is because it's kind of dense. This stuff is actually pretty tough, and in some ways, it's actually pretty tough to work with. But you know what's a lot tougher than this? Rowing in jorts. Probably not my best decision, but you know, probably not my worst one either. This is the Averon, and it's a rowing machine that I use for gamification of my exercise and workouts. This thing's way fun because it helps you keep track of your daily progress. It pits you against yourself or against online players, however you want to do that. And then it also has other features besides a whole bunch of cool games. You've got things like the scenic rowing, which is my favorite. You can also use the time machine feature, which lets you compete against your former self or against anybody else online, which is way fun. Speaking of online, it also uses all my favorite tech. So I've got my Apple Watch here synced up to it. I can keep track of my heartbeat, my zones, and everything else. And then I can also connect all of this to Strava to keep track of where my friends are at and where I'm at over time. There's also other machines that Averon makes, like the Averon treadmill and the Averon bike, if rowing's not necessarily your thing. But if you want to learn more about what Averon has to offer and how it can turn your workouts into something you actually enjoy and want to go back to, you can check that out using the QR code on screen or using the links in the description below. Be sure to use code LEARNTODIY50 to get an additional $50 off all of their products. Oh yeah! All right, let's talk about one of the more important things, which is fire. What happens when this stuff catches on fire? Well, I'd like to show you because I got so many questions about this when I posted a little short video about denim insulation, and everybody was asking, isn't that stuff just gonna burn right up as soon as it catches fire at all? Well, the answer is no. In fact, when insulation, amongst other things, is being tested, they use two different identifiers here. First, we have the flame spread index, which is basically how likely is it to catch fire and then keep burning and maintain those flames. The second one is the smoke developed index. How much smoke and fumes is this thing putting off? So there's what's called Class A, Class B, and Class C classifications when it comes to insulation. And for residential, we want all of our insulation to be Class A. Now, as it turns out, all three of these are Class A insulators. What's surprising about this is because of how the denim is treated, it actually outperforms fiberglass in this, not just in those two numbers, but also in a third way that's even more impressive. Fiberglass has an FSI of under 25 typically, and an SDI of little under 50. Now the denim here is actually an FSI of just 5 and an SDI of 35, easily outperforming the fiberglass. Now that said, what really takes the cake here is the mineral wool. This stuff, FSI 0 and SDI 0. This stuff is ideal when it comes to dealing with fire. To put this to the test, I've got a little flame torch here, and then we've got our fiberglass, denim, and mineral wool insulation bats. And we're gonna show you exactly what happens when you try to burn through each of these with the torch. So you can see that it doesn't catch fire. What's interesting with fiberglass is if you keep it in the same spot though, if that fire keeps going in the same area, you're gonna melt right through the whole thing in just a minute. And right there, we've just gotten through to the other side. So if this has craft paper on it, it's gonna melt right through and catch whatever's on the other side on fire. In fact, we got smoke coming out the top now. All right, there's victim number 1. All right, now for the denim. You would think this stuff would burn super easy, but because it's treated with borate, it doesn't stay on fire. In fact, it doesn't melt through, and it self-extinguishes. That is pretty incredible. I've been sitting here for about 20 seconds in the same spot and it is doing nothing. So this stuff definitely doesn't hold a flame, doesn't catch fire. It's doing its job just like it should. Last up is the mineral wool or rock wool insulation. A little charring on the outside, and that is all. This stuff is very well rated against fire. The thing I'm noticing about this one is there's really zero smoke coming out of this, which is pretty wild. It is carving away a little hole in there, which I didn't expect. Yeah, that heat is definitely melting a hole in there. Interesting. I didn't think it would. All right. And still zero smoke. That's wild. Okay, there you have it, all three. The denim actually held up surprisingly well, especially with a concentrated flame for a long period of time, so I'm pretty impressed. Now, once again, with all these numbers, they're great, but let's take a look at how this actually applies to our everyday life. If you're putting this stuff in a basement or an addition or even in your main residence, if you're living in a single family home, there's a good chance this just won't actually matter at all. This stuff is so irrelevant because it's all Class A. What's more important is the type of drywall you're using and then all of the stuff in your house that's likely to burn, because this stuff isn't hardly even a factor when it comes to the burnability of your home and how long this is going to take to actually spread to other areas. Next up is one that I was super curious about, and this is sound transmission. So let me make one clarification really quick to start off that I didn't understand back in the day, and I want to make sure that you do understand this. And that is, there are two types of sound transmission. One, we have acoustic sound transmission. This is waves in the air, like our voices and music and things like that. The second type is impact sounds. We're talking steps on the floor above you and footfalls. We're talking the teenage boys wrestling in the room. We're talking the chair that's being scraped along the floor, things like that. This insulation does little to nothing against any of that. Its main function is for that airborne acoustic transmission that's in the air, not through the floors and the ceilings and the joists and all that kind of thing. All right, we've got a fun experiment to test this all out with the sound. This is framed very similarly to how your house is framed and your different bedrooms are framed and everything. And then I've got 1/2-inch drywall on the inside here in a cube, and then I'm gonna put 1/2-inch drywall on the outside. Then, because I don't wanna get inside that box and talk, I've recorded myself, so I'll put this in the box, cover it up, and then we'll test the pink fiberglass, then we'll move to the denim, then we'll move to the rock wool and hear how all three of them compare. All right, we are now ready to test this thing out. I've got this 3 feet away, and if you take a look, I'll be quiet for a second and let's watch the decibel meter so you can see about where it sits.
Okay, it's 10:58 at night and I just finished building the mock-up roof here.
Okay, looks like we peaked at 56.5 decibels on that one with the fiberglass here. So I'm going to take this whole thing apart. Now we'll replace everything with the denim insulation and see what kind of readings we get from there. Round 2 is ready. This is with the denim insulation in here. Let's listen and see how this does.
Here, and just got the OSD done. Got the paper and the...
Okay, so there it was, 55.5, so 1 decibel less than what we had with the fiberglass. Now we will take the walls off and then we'll swap it all out for the rock wool insulation. This is it, our third and final round here with the acoustic testing. This is the thermofiber mineral wool inside here. Let's see what kind of readings we get. Wow, okay, 53.1. That is an easy record right there. That one definitely did much better than the others. So this played out almost exactly in line with the advertised numbers. Fiberglass in last place, then denim performing a little better than that, and mineral wool taking first place yet again. Just to put this all in context, with the decibel scale, a 1 decibel difference is barely noticeable to the human ear, and a 3 decibel difference is considered moderately noticeable. So take that for what it's worth. Next up, water. Let's talk about how moisture affects each of these. The fiberglass insulation, if you get it wet, it's gonna clump. It's like cotton candy. It's gonna clump up. When it comes to the denim, this stuff, despite being treated with the borate, it is still cotton. It's gonna wick up even more. It's gonna hold way too much. Once again, good old thermofiber or mineral wool is the king of all of this. That's why it costs twice as much. It's really good stuff. It's not likely to wick anything up very much, and it's gonna hold very little water, and it's gonna dry out pretty easily. When it comes to both fire and water, the thermofiber mineral wool is where it's at. To prove this out ourselves, we've got 500 milliliters of water here that we're gonna pour directly onto each type of insulation, and we'll measure how much comes out the other end. And ideally, this is gonna let most of it pass through and not suck a lot of it up and absorb it. Let's see how it goes. So we'll start with the fiberglass. Now we're going to empty everything out into the bowl. Looks like we have about 280 milliliters of water. Now for the denim insulation, we've emptied out the bowl. Got a fresh 500 milliliters. Let's see how this one does. All right. Here we ended up with 300 milliliters, which is interesting because that means it actually did better than the fiberglass, at least in this little test. Last but not least is the mineral wool. Let's see how this one does. Yeah, this is just not wanting to penetrate through this at all. Dribbles right over the top. Wow. That's impressive. Oh, that's 500 right there. The water test shows us that both fiberglass and denim will need to be replaced if they get wet, or they'll need lots of time to dry, with the denim likely needing even more time. Mineral wool performed amazingly well here. Fortunately, all three of these are rated to resist mildew and mold. Obviously, that only works up until a certain point. If things are just soaking in water and there's debris in there as well, like any sort of dirt or microbes or anything like that, none of them are going to stand that forever. But even with the borate treatment on the denim, it's going to do a pretty decent job, but it's probably not going to do as good of a job, in my opinion, as the fiberglass or the rock wool. I actually recorded every single step of installing all of this denim insulation, as well as the fiberglass, as part of my DIY basement finishing course that's available at DIYbasement.com. I realized that most homeowners could save anywhere from about $20,000 to $50,000 by finishing their basements themselves, so I put together a course that walks you through every single step all along the way so that you can do it all yourself and save tons of money. I'm talking framing and electrical, plumbing, HVAC, drywall, all the trim and finish, paint, everything. We'll walk you through all of that, and I've put together a whole series of calculators that will help you figure out exactly what this is all going to cost and which parts that you need to do it. You can check that out again at DIYbasement.com, but now let's get back to this beautiful denim and my basement's sweet jout fit. What about installation? This is a big factor, especially if you're a DIYer looking to figure out which one of these you want to do. And if you've got a large space, you want to know how difficult or easy some of these are going to be to work with. There's a pretty straightforward answer here. Fiberglass is so easy to work with when it comes to installation. This stuff squishes because it's so not dense, and you can actually cut this with a knife anywhere, any which way. It's super easy to cut out a little section, whether it's faced or unfaced, if it has that craft paper or not. It's just super easy to work with. Next up, we have the denim. The denim will kind of kick your butt. This stuff is a little bit tough. So when I first used this, I had done a little research online and found that using a knife with it, just like you do with fiberglass insulation, doesn't really work. And that is true. Look what happens when you try to cut this stuff with a sharp blade. I've got a brand new blade on this knife, and it is tearing. It's clumping. It's getting caught and stuck, and it just doesn't work very well. But what I read was really good is just a heavy-duty, sharp pair of shears. So I got these heavy-duty Milwaukee serrated shears and used that to do the whole thing. And it worked, but because this stuff is not itchy, I wasn't wearing gloves, and I ended up with a huge blister on the inside of my middle finger and on my thumb as well from those scissors. This stuff wreaked havoc on my skin, and it was just difficult because you have to use a lot of force to cut through those, and it's just very difficult to do. And that leads us to the mineral wool, which is a little bit of a combination between the two, but I'd say it's more like fiberglass than denim. With this, you need a longer knife. It's way more dense, but you can cut nice, crisp lines, and again, you can cut it right on the floor or up against a board if you need to. It's a little more difficult to work with because it's dense and it requires more pressure and force to cut, but it's really not too bad if you can get around all of the itchiness and all of the PPE that you're going to have to wear when using it. So as far as installation, I think all three stay in place pretty well, but there is one exception again here. When you're putting it up in the stud bay, the denim has a downfall. As I was working with the walls after putting up the denim insulation, they started to sag in some places. Basically, I was getting gaps up here, like you see here, and they were starting to droop down, and I do not want that. We want everything to be nice and tight. What I found that works really well is just to use a staple gun. You don't have to have an automated one like this, but this is what I like to use. You can actually use any sort of a heavy-duty stapler and then staple these right up to the top, and then they're not going anywhere. And that helps keep everything in place and make sure it's not going to droop later on. I set up a light on the floor to shine up so that we can see one of the other issues, and this kind of bugs me. It's not a huge deal, but basically we end up with these bulges of denim that stick out because this is where the fold is on the bats. When they come in a bag, they're folded in half like this, and when you unfold it, that joint in the middle kind of bunches up like this. And so you end up having to kind of push that in a little further, a little more, and it's not a huge deal, but it's kind of weird because everything's consistent except for these parts right in the middle. So just another thing to be aware of, and not a problem that you usually have to deal with when it comes to fiberglass. So that begs the question, should you be choosing denim as your type of insulation for your home, basement, or whatever it is that you're working on? And as usual, the answer is, it depends. If you're a DIYer and you're wanting to work with this stuff and don't want to deal with the itchiness of the fiberglass or certainly of the rock wool, denim might be a great choice for you. If you're looking for the cheapest option, go with fiberglass. If you're looking for something that has some better functionality in most ways, denim might be a great fit for you, especially with the acoustic properties, the fire properties, and others. But if you want the best of the best and you're willing to pay more, then mineral wool or rock wool is definitely the right insulation for you. In the basement job that I just finished, I chose to use the denim on all exterior walls, and it actually worked out just great. It was kind of fun to work with, fun to learn something new, and it turned out just as good as can be. And then I chose to use faced fiberglass insulation on pretty much all of the interiors as well as the ceiling. Want to learn more about the tips and tricks of how to install fiberglass insulation? Well, you can check out my video for the install process right here. I'm Nils with Learn to DIY. Thanks for watching.